welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. The cool breeze of the evening had begun to settle over the neighborhood as Mark stood by the window, watching the driveway with a mix of anticipation and dread. His wife, Julia, had mentioned she'd be at her friend Lisa's house for a simple girls' night, promising to return before midnight. Yet here he was, clock ticking past 2 a.m., with no sign of her. The dim glow of the streetlights cast long shadows, and Mark's mind raced with possibilities that he dared not entertain. Finally, headlights swept across the living room wall, and he heard the familiar crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Julia's car had appeared, much later than expected. Mark stepped back from the window, his heart pounding in his chest, a cocktail of relief and simmering anger bubbling within. Julia entered the house, her footsteps light against the hardwood floor. "Sorry, I lost track of time," she called out, her voice a sing-song of feigned cheerfulness. She looked disheveled, her usually neat hair tousled and her clothes slightly crumpled. Mark frowned, noticing the faint, yet unmistakable scent of men's cologne clinging to her. "What happened?" Mark's voice was calm but carried an edge of accusation. "Oh, we just ended up watching some movies, and I decided to stay over. Didn't want to drive back so late," Julia replied, avoiding his gaze as she hung her coat. Mark wasn't satisfied. "Movies, huh?" He crossed his arms, watching her closely. Her avoidance was a red flag waving furiously in his mind's eye. Before Julia could respond, her phone buzzed from inside her purse. Instinctively, she reached for it, but Mark was quicker. He grabbed the phone, and with a swipe, the screen lit up revealing a slew of notifications from a messaging app. Julia lunged for the phone, panic flaring in her eyes. "Give it back, Mark. It's private." Ignoring her protests, Mark tapped on the app, his thumb scrolling through a thread filled with emojis and flirty texts. But nothing prepared him for the photos that followed. His breath hitched in his throat as the images painted a stark, undeniable truth. There was Julia, unmistakably involved in activities far removed from any innocent girl's night out. The room grew heavy with a silence punctuated only by the ticking of the clock. Mark looked up from the phone, his eyes meeting Julia's tear-filled gaze. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not what you think, Mark." It was just. "How long, Julia?" His tone was firmer this time, demanding. A few months." "I didn't know how to tell you," she stammered, the facade crumbling. The revelation hit Mark like a physical blow. The room seemed to spin around him as he grappled with the betrayal. Every whispered, "I love you," every tender moment they shared, now felt tainted. "You cheated on me," Mark's voice cracked, the weight of the words almost too much to bear. He felt a hollow space open up inside him, a void where his trust in Julia had once resided. "I'm sorry, Mark. I never wanted to hurt you," Julia pleaded, her voice thick with tears. But it was too late for apologies. Something irrevocable had been broken between them. Mark's mind raced with emotions, each more turbulent than the last. Anger, sorrow, disbelief, each took its turn rending his heart. In that moment, Mark knew what he had to do. "We're done, Julia. I can't do this. I can't look at you without seeing that." He gestured to the phone, still clutched in his hand. Julia sobbed, her body racked with grief, but Mark felt numb. "You need to leave. Now." Without another word, Julia gathered a few belongings and left, her departure marking the end of their life together as Mark knew it. Standing alone in the silence of their once shared home, Mark stared at the closed door. His future, once certain, now loomed before him, obscured and unknown. The only certainty was the pain of betrayal, and the resolve to rebuild his life from the shattered remnants of what once was. As dawn crept over the horizon, the soft hues of morning light did little to lift the somber mood that hung over Mark's house. He had spent the rest of the night pacing, the images from Julia's phone replaying in his mind like a cruel slideshow. Every corner of the house, every item seemed to whisper Julia's name, echoing memories of a life that now felt like a lie. It was nearly 8 a.m. when Mark's phone vibrated. The screen flashed with the name of his best friend, Alex, who had been his confidant since college. With a deep breath, Mark answered. "Hey, man. I heard about last night. Are you okay?" Alex's voice was laden with concern. Mark sighed, his voice heavy. "I don't even know, Alex. It's like I don't even know who she was. You need to get out of that house for a bit. Let's grab some coffee." "My treat," Alex suggested. Reluctantly, Mark agreed. The walls of his home seemed to close in on him, each moment more suffocating than the last. He met Alex at a small cafe downtown, the familiar clatter of dishes and murmurs of other customers a welcome change from the oppressive silence of his home. As they sat down with their coffees, Alex leaned in, his expression serious. "You need to think about your next steps, Mark. This isn't just about moving on emotionally, there are practical things to consider." Mark nodded, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. "I know. I need to talk to a lawyer about the divorce. I wasn't prepared for any of this. That's why I wanted to meet. I have a friend, Layla. She's a great attorney. I can introduce you if you want." Alex pulled out his phone, ready to make arrangements. Grateful for the support, Mark agreed. "Thanks, Alex. I appreciate it." Minutes later, Layla walked into the cafe. She was a striking figure, her sharp business attire and confident stride marking her as a woman who knew how to navigate tough situations. Alex introduced her to Mark, and they quickly delved into the specifics of his situation. Layla listened intently, her eyes sharp with focus. "First, we'll need to secure your financial accounts. Make sure she can't drain them. Then we'll discuss custody of any shared assets and file for divorce on grounds of infidelity. It won't be pleasant, but I'll walk you through every step." Mark felt a small weight lift off his shoulders. Here was a plan, something tangible he could hold on to amidst the chaos of betrayal. As they were talking, Mark's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his heart sank. It was a message from Julia. "We need to talk. Please, it's important." Mark showed the message to Layla, who nodded understandingly. "You don't have to decide anything now. But if you choose to meet her, I advise you not to agree to anything without consulting me first." I need some answers," Mark admitted, torn between his longing for closure and the fear of reopening wounds that were barely hours old. "We can arrange a meeting in my office." "Neutral ground," Layla suggested. Mark nodded, feeling a mix of dread and determination. "Let's do it." As they left the cafe, Mark felt the weight of the upcoming confrontation settling in his bones. He was about to face Julia again, this time with his future hanging in the balance. But he wasn't alone. With friends like Alex and Layla by his side, he had a fighting chance to come out of this ordeal stronger, no matter how deep the wounds of betrayal ran. Mark arrived at Layla's office, a modern glass building that gleamed under the noon sun, feeling like he was walking into a storm. Inside, the decor was sleek and professional, the atmosphere cool and controlled, a stark contrast to the tumult churning inside him. He was early, needing those extra minutes to steady his nerves before facing Julia. Layla greeted him at the reception. "We have the conference room set up. I'll be right there with you, remember, you're not alone in this," she reassured him as they walked to the room. The conference room was stark, with a long table and chairs, the walls adorned with legal books and framed degrees. Mark took a seat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Layla sat next to him, her presence a comforting reminder of the support he had. Julia arrived, her appearance more composed than the last time he saw her, yet there was a visible unease in her eyes. She took a seat across from Mark, her lawyer, a somber man in his 50s, by her side. "Mark," Julia began, her voice quivering slightly, "I'm so sorry for everything." Mark's gaze remained fixed on her, his face an unreadable mask. "Why, Julia? Why did you do it?" It was Julia's turn to look away, her hands trembling. "I was lost, Mark. I felt disconnected from you, from us. I made a horrible mistake." "That doesn't justify what you did." Mark's voice was steady, but the hurt was palpable. "I know," Julia whispered. "And I regret it every day. But there's more. There's something you need to know." Mark frowned, a sense of foreboding washing over him. Layla leaned in, her eyes sharp. "Go on." Julia took a deep breath. "The people in the photos. It wasn't just random. It was orchestrated. There's a group. They manipulate situations. Relationships. I got caught up in it, and before I knew it, it was too late." Mark's confusion deepened. "What are you talking about? What group?" Her lawyer interjected, "We're prepared to provide all the information, but we need assurance of confidentiality and protection. This goes deeper than a simple affair." Layla's interest was piqued. "We can discuss protective measures." "Mark, do you want to proceed?" Mark nodded, the mystery gnawing at him. "Yes, I want to know everything." The discussion shifted as Julia's lawyer outlined a bizarre tale of manipulation by a secretive organization known for blackmailing and controlling its members through compromising situations. Julia had been targeted because of her vulnerability and her position in a prominent company. As Layla and Julia's lawyer discussed legal strategies and protective measures, Mark felt a surreal detachment from the unfolding narrative. The pain of betrayal was now compounded by intrigue and danger, painting his personal tragedy in a far more sinister light. The meeting ended with plans for further investigation and cooperation with law enforcement. Mark left the office feeling not just betrayed but entangled in a web far beyond his understanding. As he drove home, the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the road. Mark knew he was at a crossroads, not just in his marriage but in a situation that might just be bigger than he had ever imagined. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with potential dangers, but also a path to uncovering the truth that might finally give him closure, or drag him deeper into darkness. The morning was bleak, overcast with heavy clouds as if mirroring the storm brewing in Mark's life. Today, he would confront the core of the deception that had shattered his marriage and exposed him to hidden dangers. Inside Layla's office, Mark and Layla awaited the arrival of Detective Anders, a seasoned officer recommended for cases intertwined with criminal networks. Julia was already seated, looking more defeated than Mark had ever seen her. The air was thick with tension, each breath feeling heavy with the weight of impending revelations. Detective Anders arrived, nodding curtly as introductions were made. He set down a folder brimming with documents and photos, his expression grim. "Thank you all for coming. We've made some disturbing discoveries," Anders began, flipping open the folder. "This group that Mrs. Stanton mentioned. They're more extensive and organized than we initially thought. They infiltrate lives, manipulating scenarios to control people, often for financial gain or influence." Julia interjected, her voice barely above a whisper, "I was a fool to think I could just walk away after realizing their true intentions." Mark's gaze hardened. "But why involve me? Why our marriage?" Anders exchanged a glance with Layla before responding, "It seems you were the real target, Mr. Stanton. Your company's recent contracts and your position made you a prime candidate for their scheme. They used your wife as a point of entry." The revelation struck Mark like a wave, overwhelming and suffocating. He turned to Julia, betrayal and anguish mingling with newfound understanding. You should have told me, Mark said, his voice laced with pain. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could protect you, Julia replied, tears streaming down her face. Layla leaned forward, her tone serious. We have enough to take legal action against this group and possibly get some form of justice for what was done to you both. Detective Anders nodded. We're ready to move on them with your go-ahead. We'll need your full cooperation to make the charges stick. Mark felt the weight of his decision. Justice for what had been done seemed just within reach, but at what cost? Could he expose himself further, delve deeper into this web of deceit? He looked at Julia, her face a mask of regret and sorrow. In that moment, Mark understood that despite her betrayal, Julia was also a victim, manipulated into a situation far beyond her control. I'll cooperate, Mark said firmly, his voice resolute. But after this is over, Julia and I. We go our separate ways for good. Julia nodded, accepting his decision with a resigned sadness. I understand. I'm so sorry, Mark. With the meeting concluded, Layla and Detective Anders outlined the next steps. Mark found himself preparing for a battle he never wanted but knew he had to face. Months passed, during which the legal and criminal proceedings slowly ground forward. Mark and Julia testified against the group, their testimonies pivotal in unraveling the network of deceit that had ensnared them. Finally, standing outside the courthouse, the sky clear for the first time in what felt like forever, Mark watched as Julia walked away. There was no dramatic farewell, no final words exchanged. Just the silent acknowledgement of their shared trauma and the impossibility of mending what had been irrevocably broken. Mark turned away, feeling the chapter of his life involving Julia close with a quiet finality. Ahead lay a path fraught with recovery and rebuilding, but also with the promise of new beginnings, free from the shadows of deceit. As he walked away, the sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows behind him, a stark reminder of the darkness he was leaving behind. In this new light, Mark felt a cautious hope. The future was uncertain, but it was his to shape, away from the deceit that had once threatened to undo him.